We are really excited to be at South by for the first time for both of us.
Yes.
And Rukmini, I especially want to thank you for coming all the way down to Texas.
Thank you.
I feel like a lot of people have a very simple and fair question when they hear about you and what you do, which is, why on earth does somebody become the world's leading authority in journalism on terrorism and ISIS? So to answer that question, we called your mother.
Yes, hello?
Hi, is this Miss Botez?
Yes, this is she.
Hi, this is Andy Mills. I'm a producer who works with your daughter. I traveled to Iraq with her, and I wanted to call you up and ask you, as her mother, why do you think she does this?
Good question.
Why? She's a born freedom fighter.
A freedom fighter.
Yes, that's the way she is.
And what does this
Not
mean?
like
What does this mean to you?
Let me tell you a story. When Rukmini was 5 years old, we departed from Romania and we went to Switzerland, and she could take one toy.
Okay.
And it was a rabbit. A stuffed rabbit, obviously.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, our host, she had a villa, also a garden and things like that. And I was looking for a job, and all Rukmini has to do is to play around the house and to stay with my mother. And one day she came and she said, "Mother, I have seen many, many rabbits." And I said, yes, because they eat them. All right. And so she was going to say hello to the rabbits. And one day somebody told Rukmini that the rabbits are killed. So what she did, she went and she let all the rabbits to escape.
She went and opened up their cages?
Exactly. So she knew that she did something bad. But she said, "Mother, how can I stand to see a rabbit being killed?" And I said, "But you don't see him being killed." And she said, "Yes, I don't see him, but I know that they are killed."
Wow.
So this is a story. I don't know if this story is saying very much, but to me it was important.
Okay, I think it's fair enough to say that the story does tell us very much. And if it's not clear, folks, the bunnies are ISIS in this metaphor. And Rukmini, what kind of trouble did you actually get into?
You know, it's funny to hear my mom sounding so, congratulatory about this incident, because I got in a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble.
Oh, such as?
I'm from Romania, like corporal punishment
Is a thing.
Is a thing,
Okay.
yeah.
So beyond the bunnies, how did you actually start to do this, to become a reporter so relentlessly focused on terrorism?
So I'm going to take you to the year 2006. That was the year when I moved to Africa as a reporter for the Associated Press. I was first the West Africa correspondent based in Senegal, but I had a 20-country stretch of countries that I was covering. I later became the bureau chief for that area. And as it were, 2006 is also the year that this small group of militants in Algeria pledged allegiance to Al-Qaeda. They started doing attacks in and around the area where I was reporting. And in a very short amount of time, I saw this enormous real estate that I used to be able to travel in as a Westerner begin to shrink. They did an attack in Mauritania. Suddenly, parts of Mauritania were no longer considered safe enough to go to. They did an attack in Mali. Suddenly, parts of Mali were no longer safe to go to. And so I saw my own world become smaller as a result of this little-known group that back then was called Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. Then in 2012, this very group took over the northern half of the country of Mali. I realize Mali is very far from where we are in Austin, Texas, but the area that they took was literally the size of Afghanistan.
Wow.
This enormous, enormous stretch of land. They began running it much the way we would later see ISIS run the territory that they run. Thieves had their hands cut off, women had to be veiled, a couple that was accused of adultery was stoned to death. And I was reporting on this. It was the biggest story in my region. But it was really frustrating for me because I couldn't actually go there. It was too dangerous for a Western reporter to go there, and so I was reporting basically by phone. That changed in 2013, in January of that year. The French, who are a longtime partner of Mali, decided that this was no longer tenable. They came in and they began chasing out the jihadists, and I basically followed, like all of the other reporters, right behind them.
You went in after the troops freed
I
the
was
territory.
literally right behind them. Like our cars were behind these cars, right? And as they would liberate one area, we would go in, we would do our stories. The goal was to get to Timbuktu. And I know, do you guys think that Timbuktu is a real place? Yeah? Okay. A lot of people don't realize that Timbuktu is an actual place. It's a fabled oasis in northern Mali, and that had become the capital of this little mini Islamic state. We reached Timbuktu mid-January of 2013. I got there a couple of days after it had been liberated.
And what did you find inside Timbuktu?
Right. So in Timbuktu, I asked locals to start taking me to the buildings that had been occupied by this Al-Qaeda unit. They took me first to a bank that had been turned into their religious police. Then they took me to a boutique hotel that had become the seat of their Sharia court. Then a tax building, on and on. It was, I think, in the bank where I walked in and I noticed that there were some papers lying around on the ground. I picked up one of them and I recognized that it was in Arabic, which I don't read. And I went, I can't read that, and dropped it back down. And then I went back to my hotel that night and had
This is like the sliding door moment of your beat.
This is, exactly. So I went back to my hotel, and Mali is a French-speaking country. They also have Malian languages that they speak there, but anybody who's educated speaks and writes in French, which is a language that I do speak. The fact that these documents were in Arabic immediately meant that they were from this foreign invading group, which had come from Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, places where Arabic is spoken. So I went back to the bank the next day, and for the next several weeks, me and my Malian colleague, Baba Ahmed, basically traipsed around Timbuktu with garbage bags, going building to building, picking up these documents. We didn't go unnoticed. I became known as the trash lady of Timbuktu.
So this document, which was Arabic and which you discovered and originally tossed down thinking, oh, this is not that important. It sounds like you went home, slept on it, and thought, you know what, maybe these documents are really important.
Yeah. And it wasn't too long before the FBI, French intelligence, all sorts of other people started trying to knock on our door to see what these were, because they were actually incredibly precious documents. These were the internal correspondence of this terrorist group. And the first thing that I learned is I think I had covered this beat much like everybody else, and I had assumed that these guys in the desert were just a bunch of dudes living in a cave, you know? I had seen them as very primitive. Among the letters that I found was a disciplinary letter to a very famous terrorist in Africa, and it had a series of complaints against the way he was running his terror operation. Top of the list among the various complaints was the fact that he didn't turn in his expense reports on time.
Al-Qaeda has expense reports.
Al-Qaeda has expense reports.
And you were seeing, these were the documents that you...
Yeah. Later on, we found the building that served as the accountant's headquarters, where we saw these expense reports being turned in by various fighters, and their receipts that were that were attached to the back, just like I am going to turn in my receipts from this trip to Austin, right? And that just blew my mind. You know, I had assumed that these guys were primitive, like I said. The second thing I think,
what is it telling you what does an expense report in Al-Qaeda tell you?
They're much more organized than we give them credit. They're much more sophisticated than we give them credit. You know, we're used to kind of slagging them off as, you know, these people with this crazy ideology. They've been around for a long time. They have limited resources, and obviously they need to marshal those resources, and the best way to do that is by tracking their expenses, right?
And so how do these documents you're finding and the sophistication that's being revealed in them, how does this begin to shape your approach on this beat?
The second big takeaway, actually the biggest takeaway of this is January, February of 2013. Osama bin Laden, if you guys remember, was killed at the very tail end of 2011. So this is not even a year and a half after bin Laden, the biggest terror chief of all, had been killed. And the message that was coming out of Washington at this particular point in time was the following. Al-Qaeda has been decimated, Al-Qaeda has been destroyed, and these other little groups that exist around the world, in Africa, in Yemen, in other places, that they're literally opportunistically taking the Al-Qaeda name. They're just a bunch of thugs and drug dealers and smugglers and criminals. They're not really attached to the core. And the phrase that I kept on hearing was, there's no real connective tissue between this group in Mali and Al-Qaeda Central. And among the letters that I found were letters from the general manager of Al-Qaeda, which had been hand-carried over the dunes from the Middle East, giving this little band of fighters in Timbuktu detailed instructions down to make sure that the lights never go off in Timbuktu, because when the lights go off, people get upset, and you can't afford to have an uprising.
So what you're seeing directly contravenes the message from Washington, which is that this group is weak, it's not really centralized. Anybody who calls himself Al-Qaeda in Africa is just a faker, a wannabe.
Exactly, and it was exactly the opposite. You know, I realized that there was very much strong connective tissue, and in fact, my reporting has since been confirmed by the Abbottabad documents. This is the place where bin Laden was killed in Pakistan. The documents there included detailed reports from the guys in Mali, reporting to the big chief about their operations. So once again, they were directly in contact with Al-Qaeda core.
It feels like the traditional way that you would cover terrorism, anybody would cover terrorism, would be to cover the attacks, the horrible incidents of terrorism and their aftermath, and then to go to the governments, our allies' governments, and ask them what they're doing to fight it, right? And those would be the ways that you would triangulate. And it feels like with these documents, you're describing kind of a third way, a new approach to covering terrorism in this era.
Right. I would say that my beat, terrorism, it's probably the only beat in the world where we routinely put out stories where we do not quote them, right? Even when our justice reporters do a story about a pedophile who has been caught, you know, running a sex ring for children, we would still go to that person's...
The worst of the worst.
The worst of the worst, right? We would still go to that person's lawyer and at least get whatever comment that they're going to say, and we're going to put that somewhere, you know, in our story. This is the one beat where it's almost expected that we're not going to go to their side because they're terrorists, they're bad guys, right?
And they are.
And they are, right? And I've actually taken a lot of flack for continually trying to get their side, and I'm doing it because I have realized that the official narrative is sometimes wrong. It's politicized, right? And I guess the big lesson of my beat is I am trying to understand them. And to do that, I need to get as close as I can to them.
So how does this bring us, this kind of document diving that you're doing and this getting inside the organization, how does this bring us from Al-Qaeda to what we now know of as your beat and as the biggest story of our time, which is ISIS?
So in 2014, I was hired by the New York Times specifically for this body of work that I had done on Mali. And I was brought into the building at that point in time to cover Al-Qaeda, right? And I remember in the very first, there's a tradition at the New York Times that when you come in, you kind of get taken out to lunch by
once and only once.
Once and only once, right? There's a steakhouse downstairs in our building. We all go to eat there. I don't think anybody gets the steak into their body because you're like so nervous to be meeting with these people. So I ordered a steak, which I didn't eat. And over the course of lunch, I remember telling my future editors that I had the sense that ISIS was going to be the next big thing. And the reason I saw that coming
And what did ISIS mean to people at that moment?
It meant nothing. I mean, it was like, this is the period of time, not long after is when President Obama describes them as the JV team, right? They were this little known group, but I knew that something was up because the Al-Qaeda fighters that I had by then nurtured as sources in Mali that I was talking to on Twitter, on Skype, etc., they were telling me that they were so attracted to this group that they were considering leaving Al-Qaeda in order to join ISIS. That's a really big deal because in Al-Qaeda there's a procedure for pledging allegiance, and it's very formal and it's very important. And to break your oath of allegiance is a big deal.
So
right?
you're finding people who are basically, not to use a terrible sports metaphor, but they're ready to trade teams. They're going to leave Al-Qaeda and go to ISIS.
Exactly, and they were doing it before ISIS was what we know of it today.
And why? What would attract Al-Qaeda fighters to this infant, not yet fully formed or known new terror group?
It comes down to one word: caliphate.
Caliphate.
ISIS was telling their members that they were going to form a caliphate. We have now heard this term because they went on to actually do this. The caliphate is an Islamic territory. The very first one in Islamic scripture was the territory that the Prophet Muhammad himself administered in Mecca and Medina. Since then, there were many caliphates, and the last one in the modern era was roughly in the Ottoman period. And since then, there hasn't been one until the caliphate that most people don't recognize as being ISIS. And jihadists for generations have dreamed of bringing this territory back. It's basically, they talk about it in the same way that I think you hear evangelicals speak of Zion. It's the promised land. It's going to be this territory that is run according to Islamic law, where Muslims are going to be victorious. The thing is that under bin Laden's leadership in Al-Qaeda, they agreed that they couldn't declare this caliphate until all of the right security conditions had been met, because they were afraid that if they declared it and it was immediately overrun by Western forces, that would actually prove to be very dispiriting to Muslims. In fact, that's exactly what ended up happening with ISIS. But ISIS is much bolder and it has a very impatient, and it has a very large contingent of millennials, and they want
Well, you're
to
saying
do it.
this is like the weirdest
No,
thing to
I'm
ask,
not
but,
saying that. I'm not
but
saying that.
basically,
No.
impatient
No.
millennials.
No, you're misquoting
Okay.
me. Yeah.
No, I guess this is like the impatience of millennials could even. Let's just move on.
Yeah. So ISIS wanted to do it now, and they said, we're going to do it now, and they did. And that was incredibly riveting to these people, to their tens of thousands of supporters. We've heard so many estimates of how many members ISIS had, but just in terms of foreign fighters, 40,000 people from countries around the world up and left their lives to go join this project.
And when we speak of the caliphate, how big does the caliphate get when it's established and declared by ISIS?
Right. At its height, the caliphate was a territory that was mainly in Iraq and Syria, but went to many other parts of the world. It was the size of Great Britain. They controlled a population of an estimated 12 million people, and it grew to include a 100-mile coastline of Libya, a city in the Philippines, the Sambesi Forest in Nigeria, part of the Mali-Niger border, areas of the Sinai Desert in Egypt, and on and on, right?
I think people forget just how big, and this is in the last 3 years,
it was
just
enormous.
how big the caliphate
It was enormous, and they held that, or parts of that, for the better part of 3 years.
And how do you actually report on the caliphate? Presumably, you can't actually go there.
Right. In fact, it's very hard to go there. And I would say that the better part of my brain space on any working day is consumed with this question: how close can I get to them without getting killed? Right. I'm always trying to get as close as I can to them. And in order to do this, I've developed a couple of techniques. The first one is I stalk them online.
Stalk them online?
I do, yeah.
Does that look
In fact, they know me now, and they've created block lists of people that they believe are what they call spies. Every journalist is a spy, but so is law enforcement. I know that I'm following, there's certain criteria you look for to identify an ISIS Twitter account. When I go to follow that account, if it immediately is, if I'm already blocked before I followed it, I know it's an ISIS account because they have me on a block list, right? So in 2013, 2014, I was following them on Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, Facebook. They were amazing at bopping around social media.
It sounds like they're extremely technological savvy.
Extremely. Millennials, right?
This is the first millennial terror group.
That's right. And but what happened is Silicon Valley was incredibly slow to crack down on them, but they eventually did, and the suspensions on Twitter of their accounts started to take a bite out of their activity there. They then migrated to something that I would argue is even more dangerous. They're mostly on an app called Telegram now. This is an app that people have on their phones. It has an encryption feature, so you can have encrypted chats with people. The thing about it is these Telegram, we call them channels, basically these Telegram chat rooms. You can't get inside them unless somebody from the inside gives you the Telegram key. And the Telegram key is something that is a line of gibberish. It's like a sentence of gibberish, right? So you can't guess it. On Twitter, I could do searches to be able to find them. Same with Facebook, and then you can follow their followers, right? You can't do that on Telegram, and I think this makes it harder for law enforcement.
So how would you find the codes required to get inside these chat rooms?
Early on, I was invited by members who are on the fringe of the terror group.
And what does that
now
mean on the fringe?
Well, look, Al-Qaeda and ISIS don't get along. So you can use Al-Qaeda members to get stuff about ISIS. You can use stuff about ISIS members to get stuff about Al-Qaeda. So basically, I'm not going to say who, but people in that dynamic were helping me find the rooms. These rooms are also being suspended. They're being suspended every day. And so a lot of my daily work is basically I get up in the morning and you scroll through these accounts, you try to see which ones have been suspended, you try to find the new ones, and you keep on jumping from one to one. And I'm now part of a very small community of fellow analysts where we share, these keys to try to keep ourselves in.
And with what goal? Because I think to people who don't understand, the idea that you're in a chat room of terrorists must be kind of confounding. What are you doing there? What are you trying to find? And who else is in there?
Right.
Because it's a horrible thing that these chat rooms even exist.
Right. So this is basically like their watering holes, right? This is where they, amongst themselves, are discussing their project. They're talking about what tactics they want to use. They're talking about the types of places they want to attack, how to do it, ideas for doing it, and then crucially, the tools for doing it. So I wanted to show you, for example, now, this is a video that I took of my own phone. And it's going to show you every one of these at the top here are ISIS, Telegram, chat rooms, channels, right?
And this is actually your phone. This is a video of your phone.
This is a video of my phone, right? The Lone Lions channel is a pretty famous one. It's one that shows people how to prepare explosives. Take good security precautions and attack your target. Don't just stay. This is a propane tank that you put in a backpack. Those are the Boston bombers. That's the black flag of ISIS.
This is utterly shocking stuff.
Yeah. They're going to show you down here how to, it's in Arabic and in English. They're going to show you here the circuitry that you need to apply to make a remote controlled detonator using your cell phone, the tools that you need, right? And then they're going to show you how to make TATP, triacetone triperoxide. This is the explosive that has been used in almost all of ISIS's attacks overseas, the Paris attacks, the Brussels attack, the Barcelona attack, and they're going to show you details of how to make it. This channel gets taken down all the time, and it comes back every single time with more recipes on how to do this.
And Rukmini, who else is in this chat room besides terrorists, people they're trying to recruit, and a journalist who's trying to understand the organization? Presumably law enforcement.
I really hope that law enforcement's there. I really hope so. I think they are, because we're seeing more and more people who are being arrested in America. And when you look at the court proceedings, they get arrested after they end up speaking to somebody that they think is a member of ISIS in one of these rooms, and it turns out to be an FBI informant, right? But there's moments, at the very top of these rooms, it'll tell you how many members there are. And sometimes I'm joining rooms where I'm like the 8th member or the 9th member. So it's like me and 7 other terrorists, or me and a couple of FBI guys and a couple of terrorists. I don't know.
So back to our understanding of the caliphate for a moment. This is how people inside the caliphate are communicating with those outside,
right,
in an effort to recruit and spread the message.
Recruit, spread the message, and they're trying to reach people that are basically in their mom's basement and move them from the anger that they feel inside and move them into violence. And we've seen that they've been pretty good at doing that. They've done this all over the world.
So this is the digital side of your reporting on ISIS.
Right.
What is the other component of how you are reporting on it?
Right. So the second technique that I use is, once again, I'm trying to go as close as I can to them. When the caliphate as a territory still existed in Iraq and Syria, the front lines were pretty well defined, right? And so one of the strategies that I used is I would go basically to that front line, right? And I would hang out in that sort of middle area between them and the rest of the world. And that's a really interesting place to be, because people are constantly escaping from the caliphate. So if you hang out long enough, you will meet people who are leaving, and then you're able to speak to somebody that knew what ISIS was doing yesterday, right? And that's how I started reporting on the Yazidi people. The Yazidis are an ethnic group from northern Iraq. They live in a place called Sinjar Mountain. And they were brutally targeted by ISIS because they practice a very unique religion. It's neither Muslim nor Christian nor anything else. And in August of 2014, ISIS overran Sinjar Mountain and kidnapped thousands of Yazidis. And what is horrible about that attack is we can now look back through the literature that ISIS published. It's very clear that that conquest was not just a territorial conquest, it was a sexual conquest. They came to Sinjar specifically to take women like this woman here, for the purpose of sexual enslavement. So starting in 2015, I parked myself in a hotel in northern Iraq, and I started going tent to tent. To speak to the Yazidi women who had been released, who had escaped from the group.
Before we get there, why does ISIS want sexual slaves? It's an absolutely horrifying concept.
Yeah.
What would be the reasoning?
So this is a group that believes that it is recreating the society that existed essentially in 600 AD, at the time when the Prophet Muhammad was alive. That was a time in antiquity when slavery was practiced and when people had slaves for the purpose of having sex with them. And this is not specific to Islam. We know that slavery is mentioned in the Bible. Because they see it referenced in Scripture, and because they think that this Scripture is the way everything should be run, they then make this leap to say that it should now be practiced today. And they went specifically for the Yazidis because unlike Jews and Christians who are mentioned in Quranic scripture, they're called the people of the book, and there are some limited protections for them. The Yazidis, they practice a unique religion, which is not mentioned, and as a result, they have no protections.
So you are just outside the caliphate, its borders.
Exactly.
And you're meeting these Yazidi women who have
Exactly.
been sexual slaves
Yes.
as they are emerging
Yes.
from these horrors.
Right.
And I think we actually have a clip from the Daily when you and I talked about this
Yes.
a couple of months ago about what it was like to be in one particular tent
Right.
speaking to three women
Right.
who were in really bad shape, who
Right.
were emerging.
Right. So, all of the women that I spoke to had trauma at some level. Obviously, they've been raped by this group. That trauma became worse and worse as time went on because they're being raped. What they told me is they were being raped either every day or every other day. So you can imagine that the women who came out in 2014 versus 2015 versus 2016 versus the three that we met who came out basically in 2017, having been there for 3 years, are going to be in ever worse shape.
Zeke, let's play that clip.
We were led to the tent. We ducked in, and as soon as I put my head inside there, I just realized we had no place being there.
Yeah, they look very sick.
Yeah.
These young women they looked catatonic. I mean, they looked like they had fainted or maybe were in a coma or something. People were talking all around them, but they were out. And their mother or sister were just there with their eyes bloodshot. And I think I just turned to you at that point and I said that I think we needed to go.
Fana, the woman who was weeping inside, that was the mother of the girls?
Mother, yeah.
Oh my God. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So we stepped outside the tent and we were off to the side, and we were trying to figure out what to do next.
Rukmini of Andi.
And at that point, one of the uncles of the young women stepped out of the tent.
I saw him crying as he was coming out. Can you say why?
Oh,
it's okay. It's okay. It's okay.
And he just broke down crying, in front of us.
I want to understand what's going on here because you're a journalist going into this tent, and I think both of us know from our time in journalism that you're there to get a story,
Right.
and yet you decide to leave this tent.
Right.
And you're seeing something that's actually, it seems quite hard to wrap our heads around, which is, of course, these women are horribly traumatized by this experience, but,
Yes.
but I want to understand why it feels like they literally can't lift their bodies.
Right.
You describe them as catatonic. So what exactly
Right,
was happening in
right.
this tent?
So let me just back up and say that you're a reporter just like me. So our instinct is to always be as aggressive as possible in getting the story, right? And this particular story, the Yazidi story, is one of the ones where I've had to just really step back and go, whatever I am planning to write is nowhere near as important as the well-being of these young women. So why are they in such bad shape? They're in such bad shape because they've been held for 3 years by ISIS, right? They were held as sexual slaves. That means that they were raped repeatedly. Like I said, we were told that the majority were raped every day, if not every other day. So 3 years, that means that they've been raped up to 1,000 times, right?
It's
right? It's totally inconceivable. And the second thing that was going on that we learned later is, this is, by the way Mosul looked, basically the week when these young women came out. ISIS continued to, basically, they had a noose around the city, and they ended up sealing off the city almost completely by the time that it was liberated. Initially, they banned cell phones. Sometime later, they banned satellite dishes. They went street to street with a car that was mounted with a megaphone, telling people to get the satellite dishes out of their houses. And
they did. They gave them.
And they did. And they took them away because they didn't want people to see Al Jazeera, CNN. They didn't want them to have any sort of news of the outside world, right? These women, on top of it, were being held by ISIS fighters. And so at a certain point, all they know is what these ISIS fighters are telling them. And they told them, ISIS is victorious. ISIS has taken over the world, and they have specifically taken over Sinjar. Sinjar is their homeland. The black flag of ISIS is flying from Mount Sinjar. Your house is gone. Your people are gone. Whatever Yazidis once existed, they have all converted to Islam. And even if you manage to get out, even if you manage to escape, and you find 1 or 2 of your distant relatives, they will never take you back in. You know why? Because we have dirtied you. We have sullied you.
Is any of that true?
Well, the fact that they have shamed them by raping them is true, and this is a culture that has very strong honor more. So that part had some truth to it. But Sinjar Mountain was one of the first places that was liberated. It was liberated in 2015. I was there. I was there on that day. And so they led them to believe that there was no world for them to come back to. And so I think what we were seeing were people whose spirits had literally been broken, right? They were coming out like this, these are the refugees that we were seeing. They were literally walking past the dead bodies, of ISIS fighters. What was interesting about the 3 women is that there was medically nothing really wrong with them. We spoke to the doctor that treated them. One of them had a UTI. A couple of them had some malnutrition issues, but nothing to explain this kind of catatonic state. And the doctors were struggling to explain it, and they said the only word they could explain it with was, they're in shock. They're literally in shock.
In shock because they're suddenly faced with a world outside of the caliphate that they have been so thoroughly brainwashed
to think
that they can't kind of reconcile.
Exactly. Right. We had this extraordinary experience on the same trip. So although we walked out of that tent, and we were getting ready to go back to our normal headquarters in Iraq, and I figured we're not going to report anything. As we were packing our bags at our hotel, we got a phone call from a man called Khalid, who was the uncle of this young woman here. Her name is Suhaila. She had come out, I think, 2-3 days before. She's a
Yazidi.
She's a Yazidi girl. She had been held by ISIS for the same amount of time, roughly 3 years. And he heard that we were in the area, and he said, I want you to come to interview my niece, and she wants to speak to you. So we suddenly, that ethical puzzle we were in, which was we can't be in this tent, resolved itself because we suddenly had a family that wanted to speak to us. Suhaila happened to come from a place in Sinjar Mountain that I had visited in 2015, and I knew that that place had been freed. And when I started to speak to her, I realized that she still believed that that area of Sinjar was under ISIS control. So I opened up my phone and I started flipping through my images, and I showed her images of me, a Western woman, which would not be allowed, uncovered, walking around, in these areas. And I wanted you to listen to how she starts to come to life, as she's seeing these images. Suhaila.
I pulled out my iPhone.
This is the Peshmerga.
Peshmerga?
Peshmerga.
Okay. In Sinjar.
Because I happened to be there the day that Sinjar was liberated. I was embedded with Kurdish troops when that happened.
On Sinjar Mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah. In November of 2015.
I strolled all the way back through my photos,
And does she recognize this? This is on top of Sinjar Mountain.
and I showed her the pictures, slide by slide, of me in a Kevlar helmet, next to Kurdish troops, us at the main telephone antenna, a well-known landmark on the top of Sinjar Mountain.
This is where the PKK was staying. Okay. This is Shingal. On the very entry of Shingal. Yeah.
And I noticed as you were doing that, she sort of started to sit up very slowly.
Yeah, she pulled herself up. Literally, she was holding a railing inside the tent, and with all her strength, pulled herself up. Her uncle pushing her.
Her mood has changed.
Her uncle and her, were talking back and forth. With him pointing at things and saying, see this, see that, see this. She looked very carefully at my phone.
Just like this, yeah.
She was clearly intrigued, and then we asked her, Sohaila,
She still doesn't believe me that Shingal has
do you believe me? I've just shown you all these pictures. Do you believe me that Sinjar is now free? And
she's smiling. I think she's smiling.
She smiled. And then she gave a little laugh. And then she said,
She says, I don't believe until I see by my eyes.
I still want to see this for myself.
We aired this on the Daily, and I remember thinking the first time I heard it, and again just now, that it's such a remarkable and horrible testament to ISIS's power that you were showing her photos of her home and her homeland not under ISIS control, and she still doesn't believe it, because she has been so thoroughly brainwashed and cut off from the world. And it's fascinating in this moment. You're both a reporter covering this story, and in a weird way, and maybe in an unintentional way, you're also a little bit of a therapist.
Yeah, and this is, I think, the power of audio that I've discovered this past year. So both you and I are print reporters. We've spent our entire careers writing stories. And even though we're trying much harder at the New York Times to kind of explain the reporting process and everything else, we don't typically use the first person. And so it's hard to get at these interactions that are happening, right? There's no way for me to write a story about this without coming off as very precious and self-important, right? But in audio, you can hear that interaction. And even though I don't think of myself as a therapist, the fact is I've never been the kind of reporter that is, this model of the removed, person that is at a meter's distance or a couple feet distance from their subject, right? And it's especially not the case with these young women, right? This is a 17-year-old girl. That means that she was kidnapped when she was 14. Right? They didn't spend any time. They didn't waste any time starting to rape her. And it's hard not to be a human being first, I think, in that interaction.
And what has happened to Sohaila since you first met her, since we aired the story?
Right. So we've kept in touch with her and her uncle on Facebook. Her uncle is just this remarkable, incredibly loving man. Her father is gone. We assume he's dead. Most of her family has been killed. And in the time that I've been talking to her, so that interview was, I think, July of last year, she was incredibly worried about her little sister, who was 10 or 11 when they were taken. And all they had was a picture that they had found from some sort of ISIS social media account. And it's a picture of her with her hands on her hips, like in this kind of suggestive pose for an 11-year-old. And they figured out that it was an image that was being passed between ISIS fighters to sell her, an 11-year-old girl, right? Khalid kept asking me, is there anything you can do? Is there anybody at the State Department that, of course I don't have a way to help them. But as a result of our story, a group formed on Facebook of people who contacted us because of the Daily episode. These were men and women who wanted to help her. And they ended up sending Khalid money. And with that money, he was able to pay a smuggler to get out her daughter and her sister. And we have the most unbelievable video, which I'm not going to show you because this is part of something else that we're working on. The most unbelievable video, which is when the little girl comes back. She's she's now 15, 16. And the emotion, there when this girl that they thought had lost, this member of the lost tribe, that had come back.
This is the only good news we will be providing in our discussion
in this discussion, yes. That's true.
So I want to. You've mentioned audio and the power of it, and your kind of growing investment in it, and I want to talk about that. But before we do that, I want to end here making sure that everybody in the audience understands where the story of ISIS and the caliphate are, because the reason why you met these women is because they were fleeing a city that was falling, Mosul. Right. And the story of the last few months has been one of ISIS's retreat, its failure. Right. And I wonder if the story of ISIS and the caliphate right now is, as we are beginning to get the impression, a group in their dying days. Is that the story of ISIS right now?
So let me take you back to Mali, right, which is where I first realized that, oh my God, what I was being told by people that seemed very respectable in Washington was just not true, right? I think we're in a similar moment now where, remember, terrorism is, in the end, a very political thing, right? Mm-hmm. No administration can afford to look weak on terrorism. So, of course, at this point in time, ISIS has lost, I would say, 97 to 98% of the territory that they once held. That's huge, that's great, but the group is still around. Western Mosul looks like this unbelievable scene of destruction, right? Western Mosul was an area that, according to all the interviews we've done, was the seat of their support. How do you think those people feel about the coalition's liberation of Mosul? Right? Number one. So they have a base of people that are now living as homeless people or living in refugee camps that they can draw on. But just since the group has lost this territory, let me just point to 3 attacks that have happened that show the lethality of the group and how it continues today. Number one, in October of last year, an ISIS supporter carried out the first successful terrorist attack in Manhattan since 9/11. Since 9/11. It was a young man who took a truck and used it to ram into a bike lane. It's actually the bike lane where one of our colleagues, Andy Mills, rides to work every day, killing half a dozen or so people. Mm-hmm. The first successful attack since 9/11. That same month, a group that is affiliated with ISIS in the country of Niger carried out an ambush of American forces, killing 4 special forces and regular soldiers. That single attack in Niger is the worst death in combat for American forces since the debacle of Black Hawk Down, which happened in the 1990s. And I can go on. There's many more of these examples. So I think we're really taking our eye off the ball.
So you're saying ISIS is very much alive?
It's alive. It's mutating into a different form, but it's still very much a threat. And I think that we're in a place where we could be taking our eye off the ball as we pat ourselves on the back for the fact that the territorial caliphate has mostly disappeared.
So before we open this up to questions, I do want to return to the subject of you and audio and the New York Times and a way in which you are transforming this remarkable beat that you've been working on all these many years. And that is with a little bit of news that we're going to make here at South by about a new audio series that is built around you and your reporting covering ISIS over the last year, all the way through the fall of Mosul. And we are going to play a little bit of the audio from it so you get a sense of what it sounds like.
Awesome. On July 4th, 2014, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of the Islamic State, arrives in western Mosul in a convoy of cars in great secrecy. I remember residents telling me that all of the streets were roped off suddenly. They didn't know why. He walks into the historic Al-Nouri Mosque, a famous mosque in western Mosul. The mosque is full because it's Friday and the congregation is waiting for the Friday sermon. And then Baghdadi ascends the pedestal and he declares the caliphate.
ولا تهنوا ولا تحزنوا وأنتم الأعلون.
This is what Al-Qaeda had planned for years and had never succeeded in doing.
ووفقهم ومكنهم لتحقيق غايتهم.
In this moment, on this day,
فسارعوا إلى إعلان الخلافة وتنصيب إمام.
ISIS did it.
So that is the caliphate, and I know you've been working extremely hard on it for the last year. And to all of you who want to know a little bit more about this new audio series, you can visit nytimes.com/caliphate. You can subscribe to it, of course, on Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen to shows like The Daily. And if you're a New York Times subscriber, you're going to get early access to it. I have heard parts of it. It's remarkable. It's really powerful. It's really necessary for the world. And Rukmini, I want to thank you for a painful but very enlightening conversation about how you do what you do, why you do what you do. And we would like to open it up for questions to everybody, both at the microphones and via Slido. You can ask us about the New York Times, you can ask us about The Daily, you can ask us about the Caliphate, you can ask us about anything. So we're very excited to take some questions. And again, Rukmini, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hello. Do you guys want to, can you shout from there, or do you guys want to go to the mic?
Me? I can shout. I think I was wondering why you included video with something that was audio specific.
On the trailer. So that video is video that my colleague Andy and I shot through basically the window of our Humvee as we were going into destroyed Mosul last year. And this is just going to be basically like a little trailer on our website. The podcast itself is audio only.
Yeah. Yes, please.
So a huge fan of the run-up as well. You did an episode.
I'm going to repeat the question back because if you guys can't hear in the back.
Yeah.
Or there's a mic right there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. You did an episode on The Daily, I don't know, about 8 months ago, where you interviewed a miner.
A coal miner, yep.
A coal miner who was talking about clean coal. And I remember you seemed to be somewhat moved by your conversation with him. And I imagine after the 2016 election, it was quite a unexpected turn of events. And I was just curious, how do you go about trying to stay as connected as possible to areas that might have previously been deemed just kind of flyover areas?
Yeah, I mean, that episode was one of our most probably talked about and polarizing because I got very emotional when I talked to a coal miner on The Daily about his career and the pride he took in it and what was happening to it. And I've given a lot of thought to why I got emotional when I was interviewing the coal miner. And I think part of it was a feeling I had of being exposed after the campaign. I was a national political correspondent for the Times. I was in charge of very, important, prominent pieces of journalism about the campaign. And I think all of us confess post-campaign that we didn't quite understand the campaign as well as we thought we did in the moment. And I think there was something about the way that the coal miner was talking to me and turning the questions around on me that it was the perfect way to expose me. And I sort of, in a moment of the interview, kind of lost it. And I think people mistook that for sympathy with the coal industry. Some people did who complained about it. But I think it was just a very deeply human moment of two people finding something unexpected in each other. But your question was, how do we stay connected to the country in a way perhaps we didn't sufficiently during the campaign? And I think that what The Daily is doing, I just want to speak for The Daily because I don't edit the whole paper, is we have gone really far out of our way and made it an essential part of our DNA to talk to people we don't think we're talking to enough. We being the Times, we being kind of everybody. And if you listen to the show carefully, you know that a week and a half ago we spoke with Mona Sharan, who is a conservative feminist who was kicked, who was booed at CPAC, and we wanted to talk to her on her own terms. We wanted that to be a conversation about how do you approach feminism as a conservative? How do you think about it? Whether it's a border town sheriff grappling with red state politics of immigration. So that's how we do it. We talk to as many people as we can from the political spectrum, but we absolutely seek out voices that we don't think are being sufficiently represented. So thank you.
Rukmini, I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about what it's like to land in a new place. If you're not familiar with a new place, I'm a journalist as well, and I'm just curious, in a place that's so foreign, what are your sort of tactics to actually get on the ground and get a story going?
So I've learned that I don't actually feel comfortable in a place until I've been there, I think 4, 5, 6 times. That's kind of my space. And I, first of all, I just remind myself, when it's my first time there and it's going like hell, I'm like, yeah, it's trip number 1 or trip number 2 or trip number 3. And it's good to remind myself that, because it's actually really hard, the first time you get there. You make conceptual mistakes that you're not even aware you're making because you've never been there, before. I'm really lucky that I'm at the New York Times because, for example, in Iraq, we have just the most amazing local staff, just amazing. Abu Malik, who's our bureau manager, I'll give you just like one little anecdote. One of the first times that I was in a conflict situation in eastern Mosul, they were moving on the airport. And we had been allowed with great difficulty to go in right behind the Iraqi troops as they were trying to take the airport. The troops had stopped for lunch, which they do, and they were basically having bananas next to their Humvee. So we were sitting there with them having bananas. It gave you the sense of, we had this like false sense of security, right? And suddenly our position started to get mortared, right? And I mean, the guys who were around us just like split and started running. And we're just like, as the reporters going, what do we do? What do we do? In the same moment that the mortar started landing, my phone starts ringing and it's Abu Malik calling us. And he's like, he always calls you sister. Sister, you need to leave now. Now. You need to get in the car and you need to leave now. I'm very concerned about you. Get in the car, go. Okay, fine. I get in the car and I go. And we get out of there, and I called him later, and I was like, Abu Malik, how did you know that was happening? He said, my dear sister, everywhere you go, I am tracking you. He's like, we call him like the New York Times CIA. He basically wherever I go, he takes not just our phone numbers, but the phone number of the military guy who's driving the car that we're in, the captain who is sitting next to me, the little grunt soldier who's over here, and he's calling them every 30 minutes, to be like, what's she doing? Is she okay? Whatever.
Wow.
And it was just incredible, And so we have that kind of support structure that, of course, makes it a lot easier. And by the way, that was never a support structure that I had when I was at the AP, right? There, you're kind of figuring it out very much more on your own.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Please.
Hi.
Oh, I'm sorry. We should go back and then we'll go front. Sorry about that.
Back?
There's a back microphone.
Oh,
This is similar, I guess, to the last question, is how do you ensure your personal safety when you're trying to get as close to ISIS as you possibly can?
Yeah.
And you're in these war-torn places. I mean, and embedded, how are you, you must not feel safe most of the time, I imagine. How does that?
Well, first of all, you don't see this, in the reporting because you just see what we got. But for every place that we go to, there's typically several days and sometimes weeks, of just us waiting around. For the fall of Sinjar, I literally waited in my hotel for I think 5 weeks. 5 weeks before the event happened and before we felt safe enough to go in. So we're actually quite conservative. We're not in any way trying to be the very first people there, right? As a print reporter, that's actually not that interesting to me. The boom boom, that's much more interesting, I think, to photographers because they have to get the action. But for me, I don't need to see the bomb go off. I can go in a couple hours later and speak to people that describe what happened, and that's just as fine. So there's an enormous amount of planning that goes in. There's a security report that I have to do the night before. And in Iraq specifically, we also have security advisors who are basically former members of the armed forces who typically shadow each reporting unit.
Please.
So you both talked about your history in print journalism, and I'd love to hear what the transition has been like to go from print to audio journalism, especially as you're doing this podcast every day. What's your process like? Do you approach stories differently? You're working sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning to get this out.
Yeah, the difference is you don't sleep in audio. Daily shows are just incredibly time-consuming. The difference is that you have to structure a story. If you listen to the Daily, you know that we have a kind of a mode of telling stories that we call it narrative news, but the idea is that it's not just a chronological, it's not just what happened and then a conversation. There's a tremendous amount of care put into the way a story will unfurl. Where does the story start? What suspense is being employed? What facts are we holding from you throughout the conversation? And where do we land the conversation? And we can spend 2 hours, 3 hours a day just hashing that out and thinking through. So sometimes it's painfully obvious what the story needs to be. For example, a couple days ago, we wanted to finally talk about Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump. We wanted to finally tackle that. And we didn't want to do it salaciously, and we didn't want to go into the bedroom, and we didn't want to but we knew we wanted to start the conversation in a thoughtful way. So we began the conversation with my colleague Jim Rutenberg by asking him what the scenarios are if you're a powerful person trying to hide a sexual affair. And he ticked us through, and that became the superstructure. And then we introduced the idea of how does that fit in with President Trump. And a structure like that doesn't naturally occur. You just have to you have to throw lots of things up against the wall and think about it and figure out what's going to make the most sense. So it's just, audio is fundamentally different. The thing that's the same is that Times reporters are shockingly smart, and they're very good talkers. And so we've spent a lot of time with my colleagues and with you, just thinking about how to tell a story in audio and doing occasionally a little bit of coaching back and forth about how we might tell it. And that's new. I mean, as a journalist, I used to write stories, and now I sit across from Rukmini and I say, how do we tell the story in audio? And once we start doing it, okay, why don't we try it again? Why don't we try it this way and that way? And that's what's different. It's fundamentally different.
Yeah. It's also interesting to see, like the Suhaila story, I did it for print in a traditional print form, and then we did it for audio. And they came out, I think, roughly a week apart. And it's interesting to see that they had almost completely self-contained audiences that didn't really overlap, Like I got a completely different wind of people on Twitter, et cetera, when the audio piece came out. So it's as if you're hitting different, just different parts of the human experience, right?
I think for the journalists at the Times, like Rukmini, it's a wonderful opportunity to take a story that you've done in one form and then amplify it for an audience of hundreds of thousands of people who wouldn't have consumed it necessarily in print.
Exactly.
Which is wonderful.
Exactly.
There's something quickly on Slido that I like a lot that I want to quickly ask you, Rukmini.
Sure.
These are questions that you guys have voted on, and this is a really good one. Since you mentioned that you had a lunch with Times editors where you told them that ISIS was the next big thing, what is the next ISIS, is this question from the audience, that we're dismissing today, not taking seriously enough today?
I think the next big thing is ISIS, because ISIS is still here. In
It's still the next big
2014, ISIS had peeled off from Al-Qaeda. ISIS has not peeled off from itself. It's still itself, and it still has enormous know-how, capacity. It's created this remote-controlled style of attack where basically guys sitting in Syria are able to inspire people back in Manhattan, to carry out acts of violence. And so I think we're still in that moment now.
Scary. Yes.
Rukmini, this is a question for you. Since you've been so effective at gathering information and getting into these Telegram chat rooms where you might be exposed to information that is not only of interest as a reporter, but also certainly perhaps ethically important in terms of being able to save lives if reported to law enforcement or things like that. How do you think about balancing your obligations as a journalist with potentially being in contact with information that could be a danger to people?
So to be clear, in the Telegram channels, what they do is they're pushing out basically a toolkit. You want to do a TATP attack? Here are the steps for how to cook TATP. You want to use a truck to run over people? Be sure to get a large truck, a U-Haul truck, etc., and use it in this fashion. When they identify somebody that they want to take to the next level, they go in a one-on-one chat. And so I don't see those. So in the Telegram rooms, I've not felt like I've ever been really in the presence of something that I had a duty to report to someone. I have, however, been in touch with ISIS members, and we've had to have very kind of detailed discussions with our ethics editor about if we meet somebody in the West, who is a known member of this terrorist group, even though they say that they have left the group, do we have a responsibility to make sure that somebody's watching them, right? And it's still something we're grappling with. We are obviously an independent news organization. I am not an arm of law enforcement, and I cannot be seen as that in order to be able to do the work that I do. So I guess the answer to your question is we're grappling with it.
Thank you.
Please.
So Rukmini, my question's for you. So on some level, I see you as someone who's helping build empathy for the other. And I'm wondering if you've met your counterparts on the other side who are helping build empathy
For us?
Yeah, and my sort of second appendage to that question is, have you tried to do that yourself? Like, as in help these millennials in ISIS understand Western civilization better?
I had a long, like almost a year-long conversation on encrypted chats with a guy who was in Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. He actually ended up getting killed in a drone strike, right? Which shows you that he was being targeted, by our government. And he was a really interesting character because he sort of opened up to me. After his death, I learned that he was Egyptian and he had actually studied as a journalist. So I think that's what created the opening, is that he was interested in this profession. He had tried to do it himself and had somehow ended up somewhere else, right? And I think we both helped each other, try to understand this. He told me about the day that a leader in AQAP was killed and what it was like to go and pick up the bodies of his brothers, right? And of course, I, as an American, understand that surely that leader, there was a good reason for them to be targeted. But when you hear it from his perspective, right, that he's sitting there, like he was telling me about how he was bundling up the arm, of one of his friends, right, and trying to just tidy up this place, and it's hard not to see them as humans.
Any other questions? Yes. Oh, let's get the mic turn.
Yeah. Thank you for helping.
I think it's our last question, and then we're gonna wrap.
Yeah. Does it come off? Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm a young journalist who's graduating from Columbia Journalism School, and I want to pitch the story I did on people with disabilities and domestic violence. How do I make sure it doesn't end up in the black hole if I pitch it to the New York Times?
Ooh, yeah, yeah.
Secondly, what advice would you give to a young journalist who's starting out in such a polarized society?
Okay, let me take the first one. So first of all, thank you for your question. You should know that I applied to the New York Times for 10 years, every year, roughly around the same time. 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like all the way up to 2014. So do not be offended if they do not respond to you. I mean, if you beat 10 years, then come back and talk to me. But it's the New York Times for a reason, right? And people work very, very long and hard to get there. Now, as far as your story pitch, what editors are looking for in a story is this new, right? What are you bringing to this that has not been reported before? So look carefully at your pitch. Try to figure out what new information are you bringing, right? And try to focus it that way. Do you want to take the second one?
Remind me the second one. I was so compelled by your 10-year campaign.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the second question was, what advice do you have for young journalists starting out in such a polarized time?
That's a really, really great question. I think you just have to ignore cable news is a starting point.
Yeah. Good.
With great respect to all of my colleagues. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is find the space in your own journalism that feels, the least polarized, right? I mean, the microphones have been handed over at this moment to some of the angriest, most opinionated people. I think what we try to do with the Daily, and you should think about doing this in your own journalism, whether it's in print or audio or television, is like, how do you start at a place where you just kind of crowd all that stuff out? You just kind of close your eyes and close your ears to that stuff and say, like, who do I want to be listening to? Who's got a good story to tell? Our rule, for example, is, if you've not noticed this, We don't have pundits on The Daily because they have plenty of platforms out there. We don't have analysts on The Daily. We have people with big emotional stakes in the story, people who've participated directly. You know, the therapist who grappled with a young boy on the verge, she worried of a school shooting. What kind of decision is she making? And what is the system going to do with her decision? So, you know, find the authentic, real characters, talk to them, tell their stories, and just ignore the rest. I think that's really the answer.
I think so.
Anyway, thank you all very, very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Rukmini.